So, when did you first discover that you wanted to do this? Just as something more than just sketching in your sketchpad.
Probably whenever I realized that the ideas I had didn't really match up with my artistic ability.
Okay.
So, as a way to make up for that, if you will, I found that writing the ideas that I had down on paper would be a way to get it out, and eventually that led to one thing led to another, and eventually I got into writing.
Hmm.
And as for when it started, I think it started when I first got into college. When did you start making art, and what was your inspiration?
Let's see. I think it really started. It really started whenever I was somewhere in middle school. Um, Back then, I was dealing with my Asperger's syndrome, and I discovered that the simple process of sketching would help me cope with my Asperger's syndrome. And I would basically doodle wherever there was empty space on my notes, or when I would get a report card, I would flip it on the back and I would start doodling there. And I think that was really the start of it all. So, when did you first making art, and what was your inspiration?
Well, I've been drawing all my life. I guess I took an art class when I was in high school. But as far as inspiration goes, I mean, I've been into science fiction and fantasy all my life, and so that I guess that's kind of my inspiration is that type of genre.
Okay. So, when did you start making art, and what was your inspiration?
Well, I remember doing artistic things, drawing, doodling, all the way from elementary school. I got into middle school and was always interested in art. I was always doodling in my free time, and about seventh grade, I decided I wanted to be an architect, and so then followed that through um, high school and went to college in architecture.
Okay.
What mediums have you and do you work in, and what are some of your favorite subjects?
Let's see. I've worked with quite a lot of mediums, both traditional and electronic. Um, I've learned to work with a lot of the Adobe products, specifically the more visual-based ones, such as Photoshop and Illustrator. I've also have some experience working with drawing tablets for computers. It was always fun to work with. Um, I've also got experience working with a lot of traditional mediums, acrylic paints, graphite, and charcoal, as well as pastels, um, working with pens and color pencils and the like. And as for my subjects, I usually work. I tend to gravitate more toward things like science fiction and fantasy, just because I think they offer a lot of really interesting possibilities. What mediums have you worked in, and what's your favorite type of subject?
Well, I've worked in charcoal and drawing, pencil drawing. I've done pastels. I've played around with acrylic painting. I've built models. I've done sculpture. I've done electronic art, doing computer graphics and animation and such. So as far as my favorite, did you ask about my favorite media also? Yes, you have a favorite media.
You can say that as well as genre.
Favorite media, I've always built models. I enjoy model building and sculpting a lot, so I guess that's probably my favorite. And favorite genre, I've gotten a little bit outside of the science fiction and fantasy and done some other things, more abstract stuff, mathematical art, Mandelbrot sets and fractals, but I think fantasy type stuff is still my favorite genre.
Okay. What mediums have you worked in, and what are some of your favorite subjects?
So really for most of my career, I have worked in glass, initially starting with very traditional stained glass design and construction. and but along the way during school, I had to take art courses, and I really enjoyed working in watercolor and pastel. Although I don't use that very much anymore.
And what are some of your favorite subjects?
So a lot of my artistic career is custom commission work. So people come to you with a subject or a design in mind. So most of the time that I've done art, it really hasn't been so much my own, because I'm always trying to design what the client wants. Sometimes they need some guidance, you know. When I'm kind of left to my own devices, I tend to work a little bit abstractly, and I'm very focused on the material of glass and what glass can do and its particular characteristics. So I don't really have any favorite subject matter that I've worked with for long periods of time.
What kind of training have you had, if any at all?
None. I just dove right in. What happens, happens.
Mhm.
What training have you had?
God, I definitely think that my official training, again, sort of started in my some of my later years in middle school, where I started taking art classes at the school. But I've also had training with other artists and painters outside of school as well. And I'm continuing to develop my craft even into my college years with studio art courses. What training have you had?
The only formal class that I ever took was in high school. I had one class is in just basic art drawing. The rest of it is all self-taught. Lots of YouTube videos. So.
What type of training have you had?
So I went to school in architecture, and had very specific training in architecture, but that involved a lot of drawing and everything from figure drawing to landscape drawing to drafting to that kind of thing. And I have my bachelor's in architecture from University of Virginia and my master's in architecture from Georgia Tech. While I was getting my master's at Georgia Tech, I apprenticed with a glass studio, which didn't really have very much to do with what I was studying in college. But I happened across the studio, and I had taken a class or two in stained glass before because I just really liked it. Ended up serving a 3-year apprenticeship and kind of learning stained glass from top to bottom. And then since then, through the years, I've taken a number of different classes from nationally known artists. I don't have any other formal, degree-seeking training, but I've taken classes in glass painting and glass casting and fusing to expand.
Are there any particular styles or artists that have influenced you in any way, shape, or form?
Tolkien might have a little bit to do with it, because I do like the way he describes his world, so I suppose I took inspiration from him when it comes to describing my world, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, it's the rest of my inspiration as terms of writing styles came from other fantasy novels like Harry Potter or other books like that.
Okay.
What styles and artists are your biggest influence, and do you work with others?
Let's see. I usually work by myself. I've yet to collaborate with other artists, at least in any big, projects. And some of the styles I take most influence from are definitely sort of the anime style. I remember that there was this one book, How to Draw Manga, an anime, that I definitely had a big influence on how I draw characters, and the like. Recently, however, my styles have begun to shift more towards, I guess you could say, more Western style of cartoons and visuals. But yeah, that was definitely anime is a huge influence on my style. What styles or artists are your biggest influence, and do you work with others?
Well, I work with your mother, the stained glass art, the Alexander Art Glass Studio. I help her out with her construction work and installations and doing all the rebar and steel work for the windows. She's the only artist that I've ever worked with making art. Everything else I've pretty much done on my own.
Okay. And what of the styles and artists, what would you say are your biggest influence just from the style or art?
Well, growing up, was it Larry Elmore, I think, the fantasy artist? Brahm is another fantasy artist that I enjoy their work quite a bit. The Hildebrandt brothers, they were famous for a lot of Tolkien type art back in the 1960s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So that is probably some of the stuff that inspired me early on about wanting to do art.
What styles or artists are your biggest influence, and do you work with others?
So, this is a tough question for me personally because I don't identify real strongly with with any particular artist. I don't know why. I've always been really compelled to do art. I think because I just want to do something different that hasn't been done before. So I think I really focus a lot less on art history or works that have probably somewhat to my own detriment. I probably would benefit from a little more awareness of the history of art and glass art and as well as contemporary work that's being done. But honestly, when I come to a project, the thing that's just driving me is I always just want to try to do something that's a little different than either I have done before or people have seen before, um, and that's if I had to say of all the epochs of art history, probably Art Nouveau is my favorite. Most of my work probably isn't visually indicative of that, but I like the grace and the balance and asymmetric balance that you frequently find in Art Nouveau, and I think that shows up in my work, even though it's not, really evident.
And do you also work with others?
Oh, yeah. In a number of different ways. I mean, most of my more traditional projects are me designing them alone. But sometimes, if it's a large project, then I will work with other stained glass artisans to help me build it. Most recently, I've done a residency with two other artists where we were all working in different mediums, but based on the same theme. And I've kept in touch with one of those artists, and we're now doing some collaborative work. And I've just started doing that recently, and that's really cool because, especially when you start working with somebody that's not in your own medium, and you're trying to combine the two and take some of what what they're generating and some of what we're generating, and that's very exciting.
Okay. Has your art changed over the years, and if so, why?
It most certainly has. For one thing, my writing style has been tuned, if you will, and I find it still tuning, especially whenever I look at old writings I've done and try to improve them, so to speak, if not just scrapping them entirely and starting over with a fresh page. How has your art changed over the years, and why?
I think one of the biggest changes in my art I can think of is definitely with my figure drawing. I remember when I started drawing, I think up until somewhere around high school, I could barely even draw anything more than a stick figure when it came to drawing human forms. Now I'm drawing them almost all the time, and that just came from years of practice, basically. Has your art changed over the years, and why?
Well, I like to think it's gotten better. I like to think that my skills have improved. I've kind of gone more from buying model kits and drawing to doing more original things. I've gotten into 3D printing now and starting to do my own sculptures electronically and then render them in 3D printing, render them in plastic. And I've gotten more involved in computer art and animation and doing more original things that way.
How has your art changed over the years?
I think that it's gotten a lot more experimental. When I first started, I was building stained glass windows. Kind of like church windows or in residences, or very traditional. And they were great. I mean, not great, but that was compelling to me, and there's a lot about the medium that's very even if you're just working traditionally, it's still a challenge. But in the past 5 to 7 years, I've really been trying to push the envelope of what I can do with the medium as I know it. And so I've now recently been working much more sculpturally and three-dimensionally, and just trying to kind of redefine what people think of when they think of stained glass, instead of just the traditional church window. Maybe it's just really a piece of fine art.
Has artwork impacted your career? Like, has it guided you towards one career choice over another?
Not really. It's more of a creative outlet. It's not really something I want to pursue full time, but it never hurts to have a passion project, does it? Has art impacted your career?
Art has definitely been a major impact on my career. Initially, I wanted to become a studio artist sometime in high school, but I figured that I probably wouldn't be able to make enough money that way. So I decided to shift my career goals to being a graphic designer. I figured that I could make more money that way and working an hourly wage instead of just getting money via commission, and that would be a lot more steady and reliable, and I would still technically be working, with art. It's still very visually based, obviously. Has art impacted your career?
Yes and no. I think that when I was in graduate school anyway, I was involved in art and doing art in graduate school, but even though I was studying engineering, I think that my professors liked the novelty of having, a student that was facile as an engineer and competent as an engineer, but also as an artist, and could draw and could do sculpture and that type of things, and entering contests and such. They kept up with what I was doing. They took an interest in it. So I think that they saw it as a mark of creativity.
Has art impacted your career?
Well, I mean, in a lot of senses, art is my career. I worked in architecture for about 8 years, on and off, and I've always maintained a studio, pretty much since I graduated. So, I did get some glass commissions as a result of my work in architecture, so there was kind of some crossover there, which was really neat. And even though I'm not doing architecture anymore, I'm still doing glass.
Does art have a deeper meaning to you?
I do believe it allows us to express thoughts and ideas that wouldn't be expressed other ways. For example, with music, it sort of invokes feelings, and with certain pieces of art, it invokes certain styles, and to me, with writing, it invokes stories. Does art have a deeper meaning to you?
I definitely do think that art has um, a very deep meaning, because I've always sort of felt that art is capable of capturing emotions to a degree that many other mediums have a hard time capturing, except maybe, like, say, music. Or visual art can express, an emotion in a figure just based on how they're positioned, like if they're excited or if they're depressed or whatever. It's almost I consider almost like a universal language for mankind. So I do think art has a deeper meaning. Yes. Does art have a deeper meaning for you?
Um, well, people talk about art as being an expression of the soul or being an expression of some deeper human quality. For me, it's simply an urge to create. And professionally, I create by pushing carbon around and, forcing carbon atoms to do things that God didn't really intend for them to do, but are useful for people. And you work with a media and a set of laws and a set of principles to make that happen. And art, you kind of do the same thing. You have an idea in your head and you push a media around to manifest that idea in reality. For me, it's simply the joy of creation. Does that mark some deeper meaning in my soul or in my persona as a human? Maybe. I don't know. I simply have an urge to create, so I do.
Does art have a deeper meaning to you?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all I want to do. I think that I think art is really one of the best things that we can do as human beings. I think creating really evocative and impactful art takes kind of a higher level thinking that is one of the characteristics of our species when we're at our best. Really good art is not just attractive, to look at, but somehow makes connections. And I think that the best pieces that I do take any number of different themes and somehow tie them together in something that is larger than just the topic of the piece of art. And it takes thinking, outside the box, and it forces you to kind of stand back and reevaluate things a little bit, which I think is a good habit for us all to get into, just in terms of living peacefully on the planet with one another.
Have you ever been challenged anyway in working with art?
Well, whenever I look at my older writings, I do smile and laugh at how awful they are.
Okay, but has there ever been a time whenever you're working on a project where you reach some kind of writer's block or some legitimate hurdle you had to get over if you were going to continue working and potentially improving your art piece or your craft?
We all experience a block of some kind, whether it's writer's block, artist's block, musician's block. And whenever we're facing that, I find the best way to solve that is just to step away for a few days, if not weeks, and come back with a fresh set of eyes. And whenever you do so, you may find ways to improve what you already have while adding new things to your story. Have you ever had any challenges in working with art?
One issue I have noticed in myself, especially in some recent years, is the fact that I tend to start a lot of projects, but I have a hard time finishing them. At least my personal projects. For projects like, say, for my work in graphic design and in my schoolwork, I tend to be able to finish them on time. But with my personal projects, I just have this habit of starting them and not finishing them for whatever reason. And it's gotten to a really bad point where I had all these unfinished ideas, and it kind of got me a little frustrated. So that is a bit of a recurring issue I have to deal with. Have you ever encountered any challenges in working with your arts, like mentally or physically, or any kind of things like that?
Of course. I mean, the media doesn't always do what you want it to do. Sometimes you can't get the idea, um, well enough formed to manifest it physically, or sometimes you simply don't have the skill to manifest it physically. So and when that happens, you look for ways around that. You try to improve your skills. You try and figure out a different way to manipulate the media. You try and find an expert who knows more about it than you do. And in that way, it's the same as engineering. If I run into a problem that I can't solve, I look for people to help me solve it. I try to improve my skills. I look for different routes and different avenues to solve the problem.
Have you ever had any challenges in working with art?
Making money. I'm really good at art, and I'm really not good at making money at it. It's a challenge to balance those two things. I've made stained glass, both commissioned for profit and speculatively for a long time, and I've never been able to manage the business to be really very profitable at it. And I'm lucky enough that I don't really need to, but that's kind of like two different sides of my brain that I have trouble reconciling. And for a long time, I also had trouble with self-confidence. And that's part of the profitability. Is having the self-confidence to ask a proper price for what your art is worth, and really just being comfortable in my skin and saying, yeah, art is what I do, and I'm an artist. So I think those two things kind of are tied together, but I went through some real periods of self-confidence issues, and I'm getting better at the profitability thing, but it's still not my strong suit.
Why is it that you keep coming back to writing?
I suppose, like I said before, it's a creative outlet to me, but it's also a bit of a stabilizer as well. If I had a bit of a tough day and if video games doesn't work, I just put on some music and see what I can't improve and what I can't add. Why do you make art now?
Well, I make art now because it's, I would say, almost a part of me. It's something I think about almost on a daily basis. It's something that whenever I have nothing else to do, I will find some way to make art. It's, like I said, it's kind of a part of me now. What keeps you coming back to art?
The need to create.
Okay.
And as I said, it's for me, it's not really much different than being an engineer. It's making something that wasn't there before.
And why do you make art now?
Kind of referring back to my answer about what's important about art, I think art is just one of the things that makes life bearable on Earth, and seeing what other artists do and engaging with art, and going to an exhibition and seeing something and liking it or not liking it, or having to kind of just step outside of the normal everyday of doing your laundry and your dishes and fighting the traffic and all that kind of stuff. It's really what brings grace to our existence, and I have always felt driven to do it. I am always happiest when I've got a piece in the works that's really, really pushing the boundaries of what I know how to do, because then I'm figuring out new things, and it keeps me young.